So this is a recording of a demo project for TopTal hiring process, and this is what I've managed to do in a week. Um, Although practically it has been 4 evenings. So, first of all, we have authentication, where you can create either login or sign up. It has like predefined fields. Also some niceties like a hidden password and so on. I will not be logging in as myself right now, because for the demo purposes, I've created a couple of dummy users. Now here, if I click on a dummy user, then it will log me in as that given user, and we are in. We can also log out, and you see that these two, John and Stacy, they're regular users, and then we have Adam, who is an admin. And the admin, you can see that the admin user has access to 3 different pages: home, admin console, and admin report. While if I'm logged in as Stacy, she has access only to the home page. So for now, we'll continue as Adam. And so, so you see that the page has like a basic setup. The routing is set up. As I also mentioned, the routes on the client, but also on the backend, are protected based on the authorization and authentication, meaning that if I want to navigate to admin console, then if I'm a regular user, I do not see the option in the website. But even if I try to log in as a regular user and go to, you see that I tried to go to admin site, and it has redirected me to the homepage because I was logged in as Stacy, right? So yeah, then the next thing, so you can see that all the other pages are empty. I didn't get around to work on the front end as much because, again, didn't have enough time. But I've added the option to create new food entries, and that's what you see here. Like, that's the JSON, that's the text data. It's just not formatted into an HTML. It's just pure data. But if I click on add entry, I can decide to log that I had drank milk. Let's say it was 200 milliliters or so, and the cost was $2. I can create it, and you see that it has been added here as the new entry. And this, just to show that this data is what we are fetching from the backend. If I log out and log in back again, okay, so that has failed me just now. Anyway, oh yeah, no, here it is. Here is the milk that we've just added. So that's here. And this is pretty much all I have for the front end. Again, as I said, the time was very tight for somebody who has full-time employment. This is the best I could have done. I'm still pretty happy with how much I've got done in that short time. Anyway, so this is for the client, the front end. So we'll move on to the backend. So the backend interface API is in GraphQL. So you can see that the top level queries and mutation. So the things that you can get is split into basically three uh, ranks or categories. One are queries which anyone can get. So if I write a query, hello, it should give me a result. So I can access this. Then the next one is queries and mutations prefixed with me, and these relate to the front end. These are the ones that the currently logged in user in the front end has access to. So for example, if in the front end user wants to create a new entry, they will have to go through this me endpoint, and that will check whether they are authenticated, whether they are signed in the process. Authentication is done using cookies and sessions. So it's basically that the first time user logs in, a session information is saved, and the request, the user gets back a cookie, which they then send along with all the other subsequent requests, and this way we can check if they are the correct user or not. And so as I said, these me queries, they work on the current user. We then also have admin, which is if someone is logged in with admin role in the front end, then they have access to these endpoints. And you can see that if we look, for example, at the create food mutation, then if I'm creating it for myself, I can only enter the food entry details. But if I'm creating it as an admin, I have the option to specify a user ID, meaning as an admin, I can create food entries or delete them or do anything with them for other users as well. So this is for the interface, and now let's move on to the code. So first I'll go through the client. So the client is running on Vite, which is quite nice, quite speedy. The project is built in Vue 3. It's using, well, it's Vue 3 TypeScript, using Vuetify as the UI library, using GraphQL Apollo client for the communication with the GraphQL server. So you see here that here we, for example, have defined the queries to interact with the food queries for the current user. Additionally, as I mentioned before, here we also have authentication, meaning that if user logs out or in, or they try to access a route which is not available to them, we will the app will catch this, and it will redirect the user at that point. Maybe to touch a bit on that, as I mentioned, like regular and admin users, so that is implemented with user roles, meaning that any user can be associated with some roles. Like we've seen that Adam has an admin role, and for example, on the front end, we check that given routes, for example, this admin/console route or page, is accessible only to the users who have this role. If they do not have the role, then on the attempt to access this page, they will be redirected to login page or home page. So we also have a router set up. This is done in Vue 3. I should mention, so still quite experimental in a way that Vuetify still does not officially support Vue 3, although the beta release is coming in about a month, or at least that's what's been promised. So you could say that we are using the latest reasonable packages, right? Because we don't want to go onto libraries which are flat out broken. Yes, and then you can see that it's also using what's quite popular in Vue, composable approach, meaning that most of the logic is defined in the setup, and that we can keep the related logic close together. And for styling, it's using CSS. Here maybe that config is handled mostly within the app, and there is the config has like several modes, like there's versions, like there's dev version and prod version, and they define which of the configs will be used. So this is of course, like, more additional variables can be passed from the environment if needed, but I found working in on other projects that it's actually more pragmatic to keep the information here, unless it's something which would need to be hidden. Some other niceties is that, what else do we have? So we have ESLint set up. There's prettier set up, so whenever I save something, it's auto formatted. There's Apollo plugin, which means that if I define a GraphQL query, I get the support of what field is inferred to what. So this is really nice overall, because in addition to other tooling also on the server, it means that most, or like 99% of all the data that we interact with, whether it's the database data or the GraphQL, we have that type covered. So the whole app development, although it's still TypeScript / JavaScript, it's fairly robust thanks to all the tooling. And on that, there's also GraphQL CodeGen, which generates files and typing, which can be then used as example is, for example, there's this use food entry, a composable function which imports auto-generated functions, and this way you see that I only have to import them. They maybe do some small work or modifications on top of them, but I don't have to deal with most of things anyway. Like this whole file, just 100 lines of code, and it's CRUD, both reading and mutating one single resource, which in this case is the food entry. Right, so this is very convenient to work with, and yes, and so that's thanks to the CodeGen. There's also Jest, although in my personal project I would be looking into Vitest, because that seems to be the new kid on the block, which is supposed to be much faster than Jest. And yeah, and that's all for the front end. since we didn't since we weren't asked to deploy this, there are no GitLab CI/CD actions or pipelines applied to this. There is a build function, but no image or artifact is built out of this. In my case, I would since this is kind of a front end which depends mostly on the back end, then in this case I would go with the route of deploying this onto either CDN or S3 and use that as the source that is served when the user navigates to a particular URL. Okay, so now let's move on to the backend. So the backend is again TypeScript, Node.js. I'm using Prisma to define the database models. For developmental purposes, I used also SQLite initially, but I've moved to Postgres. So in other words, when I interact with the Prisma client, it is interacting with the Postgres database. And we can see that when I open the test, and so you see that it's Postgres 14, and here are my test entries. You can also see that so I'm basically storing users, their passwords, their roles, their settings, where the setting would be would allow users to set the monthly limit for price or daily limit for calories. And we also track all the food entries. Like here you can see the milk entry that I've created earlier in this video. So yeah, so we are using Prisma that generates the Prisma client, which is then what we actually interact with. Like an example is that if I look into data sources, food entry, then you can see that here I have the queries defined, which validate the input using Joy, which is very, very nice to work with. And then I send the request to Prisma, which sends it then to PostgreSQL. Now, of course, unfortunately, Prisma doesn't handle everything for you, so there are some things like foreign keys, on delete actions, and maybe other, which would need to be implemented directly in SQL. For that purpose, I have deleted it from the code base, but before, in earlier versions of in earlier commits, you might have seen migration files. So Prisma has migrate option, which basically generates the SQL files for the current schema, and then I'm able to build on top of that and add additional modifications. And so that way I would implement something like on delete cascade, so that when I delete a user, I also delete all the other user information, like their settings, their food entries, and so on. So that's how we deal with the database. To deal with the session, and logging in and the authentication. For that, I'm using Passport, um, and for the demo purposes, only the um, local strategy, which means that when I want to log in, or when I'm being authenticated, then I do it through email and password. For the password, like you could have seen earlier, when I was in the database, that the password is hashed. So you can see that it's hashed, and using a bcrypt hash, with and when we verify passwords, we again hash the given password and see if it matches the encrypted one. Also, another reason why I kept the password separate from the user was to give it again like that additional bit of security, so that when we are requesting user information, we are not accidentally requesting passwords. So for passwords, we have to explicitly go to the passwords table to get them. And yeah, so for the authentication, it happens that every time when you hit a server, it checks if you have cookie with session information in it. If so, and if it's able to find you in the session storage, which is handled by Redis, then it lets you in. If not, then it tells you that you're not authenticated, and you need to go to the login endpoint. So next, GraphQL. GraphQL also has authentication. It's implemented as an @auth directive. What that means is that when I have, for example, top level queries, as I've mentioned before, it has this auth directive, and that specifies one, that if you want to access anything within this field, you need to be authenticated. So you need to be at least a regular user who is logged in. And second, with these roles, like here in admin, we can also specify additional privileges or additional roles that this current user has to have associated with them to be able to access these resources. So in short, the endpoint me is accessible to any user, whereas the endpoints admin are accessible only to users with the admin role, like the admin dummy user. And so that protects the GraphQL endpoints. And yeah, I'm not sure if there's much else to say about this. So we move on, and then so I already talked about authentication. So then in these files, oh yeah, so the app also implements CORS, so cross origin vulnerabilities or considerations, and so yeah, so both work on when they're both running locally or accessible through localhost, or if they were both deployed and under the same domain. But if the server was running on a no-name domain or like auto-generated one, then this could cause issues. So we have not much else to talk about here. yeah, so then maybe moving on. So I said already that I'm using Postgres and Redis. So this is then set up using Docker and Docker Compose, where you can see that I have two versions. One is the production build, um, where you can see Postgres and Redis, and our node server, which is has a reverse proxy and Nginx. Um, so that's how all this is orchestrated. For the local development, you can see that, for example, I'm not running the node server from inside the Docker, so that I can debug it easily. And then there are other things, same as on the client. We have code gen, so that the GraphQL endpoints are auto-generated and type validated. We have ESLint, Prettier, and all that stuff. Again, the config is the same, that we have several versions like dev, local, and prod, where based on the app environment, that's how we define which of the in-app in-app config we use. So again, you can see that we have like in-app config defined for each of the environments, and so this is again to keep to avoid overloading the environment variables unless necessary. But you can see here that still in the end file we keep secrets like the DB password. So yeah, and of course, like the server is built, and yeah, lastly, there's this playground.ts file, which, as it it is what it sounds like, playground. So here you have access to all the endpoints without having to go through a server. So this is more like for testing things out. So you can see here that currently what I have here, that in my main function I create demo data, and this is where I have created the data which I can the dummy data of these three users, right? So that's created here. So that also allows me to be able to quickly do any sort of modifications necessary. And that's pretty much all for what I have here. So yeah, the description was longer than expected, but you can see that there is a load of quality of life features. The whole setup is quite modern and following best practices. And yeah, from my experience, I know that this setup is good for it might be a bit too complex for a single person, but it's working well for at least mid-sized teams. So like up to maybe like 10 people. This kind of setup allows everyone to work on their bit, everyone to have the type safety, and for the code to be in sync. So just to close, although the front end is not implemented, the code base is in a state which would allow effective collaboration and easy maintenance, which in the long term is probably more important. Okay, so this is all I had for the description, and I hope it helps. Have a nice day. Bye.